All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Colin's Corner. This is going to be a spoiler filled discussion of Book 4 of the Malazan Book of the Fallen, House of Chains. We'll talk broadly for a little bit if you just want to pop in and say hi. But if you want to avoid spoilers, we'll let you know when to get out. But I'm here with some of my BookTube friends, and I'll let them introduce themselves. Usman, you want to go first?
Yeah, I'm Usman. My channel is Bards and Books, where I talk a lot about books, mainly fantasy, sci-fi, but branching out into some other stuff as well, and music, metal music primarily. So, yeah, that's what I'm all about.
Awesome. Caleb.
Hello, I'm Caleb. My channel is Celebrity. I also talk about books, mostly dark fantasy and horror. Bit on a bit of a hiatus right now, but I'm hoping that this is my commitment to doing more book stuff on YouTube. Yeah, that's me.
Awesome. Carlos, one half of StoryTube.
Yes. Hello, I'm Carlos. I am one half of StoryTube with two O's. I also talk about books, whatever books I happen to be reading at that time. It can be really anything.
Witness. We're going to talk a little bit about this today.
We sure are.
Yeah, we were just briefly chatting before this, and I think a few of us have been on a little bit of a hiatus. So I wasn't sure if anybody was going to pop in. So thank you, everyone that's here now. Before we get into nitty gritty details, I'm just going to ask you guys overall impressions upon closing the cover of House of Chains. What were your thoughts on this big boy?
Well, I loved it. It's funny going in. I heard a lot of people say that it's going to be quite different from the previous books, like the structure. And they mentioned it would be a little more linear to start off with, and I had a feeling I would really enjoy it, and I absolutely did. So, yeah, it's a phenomenal book. It got some classic Malazan themes that Steven Erikson plays with. And for me, the books are just getting better and better. So I'm loving it. I'm loving my time with them.
Awesome.
Yep.
Caleb, what do you think?
Yeah, I feel like the past two books we've read, I feel very conflicted about this book. Simultaneously, I think it's the best written of the series so far. I think Erikson's prose is the strongest it's been. His descriptors are the best. The way he kind of ties the themes of war and like being chained to the destiny you create yourself, the destiny others try to create for you. I thought that was all great. There were some plot threads that I really struggled connecting why they mattered at all. Particularly Troll Sangar's arc, which we can talk more about that. But for every plot that I didn't really enjoy, we had Karsa. So, it evened out in the end.
Yep. I would sort of be somewhere in between the spectrum of Caleb and Usman, where there are, I guess, chunks of this book where I thought perhaps not unnecessary, because I am actually halfway through the series, so I think I've read one more book than you guys. We can talk about Troll Sangar's part in a little bit, but that is massively important, obviously, for Midnight Tides. I do think that his writing is probably at its best in Midnight Tides, which is an unfair thing to say in a conversation about House of Chains. But I do think that this is probably the first book in the series where I thought there was some real fat on this book. And from what Usman was saying about the structure of it being pretty cool, and this book sort of being Karsa's book, I think Erikson could have gone a step further and just made this entirely Karsa's book. Instead of just the first section. There's obviously, you get more of him at the end of the book too. We can get to spoilers in a bit, I guess. But yeah, maybe it would have been even more ballsy had the entire book just been Karsa. But I have read ahead, read on. There are other subplots that are important then in Midnight Tides. But even they could have been separated. Like, it could have been separated. That's, I think, from a good few months removed from the book now, I think I would have liked just Karsa for this one.
I can get on board with that analysis.
I
Yeah.
can as well, and I think I kind of lean a little bit more towards Carlos. I think later in the video we'll talk about what our ranking is, where this falls in the series for us. But first, I want to say hi to some people that are choosing to avoid sleep. Apparently, Dom, our buddy Dom from Discord,
Who needs
hang out with us, and I really appreciate you guys coming. We have Bob repeated. Hello, Bob. And
Also,
of course,
thanks
Matt on
to
books.
the boys here for organizing this, because I totally forgot about this till yesterday.
We've been, if you're in our Discord, this has been a very we knew it was going to happen someday. We just weren't sure when it was going to happen.
Yeah. Part of that was my fault, because I took my sweet time reading this book.
That's quite all right.
I agree with Bob there.
We'll get into this, I'm sure. And hello, Claudia. So I know I did want to say that I want to start with Karsa, and I kind of do, but I don't know if this is a fair statement, but it seems like most of Dead House Gates and the entirety of this book happened, the plot, because of one character.
Yeah.
Onrak, right? We'll get into that, but I just thought that was kind of funny because we finally find that out.
Yeah.
But so Karsa Orlong, first impressions of Karsa, at least I guess I'll go first for me because I didn't really talk about the book. I'm torn on Karsa. I like Karsa a lot as a character. It took me a while, I think, like everybody, to figure out what exactly was going on. Talking about killing children and literally just being a menace to society, and for what seems to, like, even his friends and definitely the reader, like, not valid reasons. I was really questioning Karsa's motives and, like, if they were valid for a lot of the first part of this book. And I was conflicted because part of me, like, as just a fantasy fan that likes, a good, rough little invasion of a town or this, that, or like, that part of it was fun. But, like, in the back of my mind the whole time, I was like, man, Karsa is awful, like an awful, awful being doing horrible things. And, like, it was to the point where I guess I'll kind of talk about this, tie it into the end, but, like, I'm not 100% sure that Karsa got redeemed for me, or if that was even Erickson's point. I don't know if Erickson wanted Karsa to feel like a redeemable character or not a redeemable character. So those were kind of my initial thoughts on reading the first part of this book. I don't know. What did you guys think of Erickson's choice to zero in on one character, which he hadn't done up to this point? That took a little bit, but not really long for me to adjust to. Like, I enjoyed reading this, the zoomed in focus on Karsa. But yeah, what did you guys think of this opening with Karsa?
I think I had. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
I was gonna say, I think I have similar thoughts to you, Colin. I really enjoyed how laser focused that first part of the book was. I really just struggled with understanding why it mattered. Obviously, we find out later why a lot of that matters. But it was a lot. I felt like it was a lot of fluff that wasn't entirely necessary, especially considering there's so many other parts of the book that I also don't think were entirely necessary. Some of it being very cool, but I also feel like a lot of it was planting seeds that might be relevant in later books. Was it in the first couple chapters, he and his friends get that demon lady out from under the rock where they called the fork a sail or something like that. Oh,
yeah, that's one of the that's the last of the elder races that we have to meet, right? The fork will a sail.
Yeah. So, like, I imagine, like, that's something that will become relevant much later, but as of right now, it doesn't really seem that relevant. It felt a little long because, like, I also read other books, so I read, like, crime and horror books. So I get to the end of book 1 of this book, and I'm like, wow, I've read a whole book already.
Yeah.
I have 850 pages to go.
I think that was the point of the first section as well. Like that is a sword and sorcery novel. That is Stephen Erickson's Conan the Barbarian novel. I mean, it's 250 pages. That's a novel by normal standards.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it doesn't really matter one way or another whether you like Carcer or not. I don't think that's the point. I don't think you're supposed to be one way or another. I think it's just supposed to kind of generate some questions about culture, civilization, order versus sort of military discipline in, you know, colonizing empires versus more barbaric, wild tribes. You know, think of I don't know, like Germanic tribes in times of ancient Rome, or Visigoth tribes in the times of ancient Rome, where the Romans thought that they were bringing sort of militaristic order and discipline to wild barbarians. But there is an equally violent aspect to that, just because it's more kind of civilized in our perspective is sort of equally violent. And I think Carsa sort of represents let's have a look at that barbarian character from Sword and Sorcery and really poke into the anthropology of that. It's pretty heady, but like it's kind of interesting when you judge it by, I guess, modern moral standards. He's in a tribe that is completely insular. And I think I just picked up on it immediately that I was reading Conan the Barbarian, but in Malazan, and that was just kind of cool to begin with. So I was along for that ride. And then you're kind of, he raises questions of like moral relativism, I guess, of like, okay, well, this is how this society works, this little tribe. Does that make him evil when it's all that this tribe knows, when he then starts interacting with other civilizations? And then, you know, he is kind of also dragged into that civilization. And that's kind of a cool metaphor in itself as well, of like, he's, you know, dragged in chains into being a civilized person somewhat. And kind of by the end, almost not flips necessarily, but certainly becomes more worldly, I suppose. Is how I've come to see Carsa. To be fair, I've been thinking about this book for the last like 5 months, however long. But
Could you
yeah,
say that could you say that he's like an exaggerated version of his culture? Or is
yeah,
yeah.
I'd say that's the point. It's probably like, let's show you the biggest, baddest, meanest mother F from this culture and see what happens when we throw in the Roman Empire and we put them into sort of civilization, you know?
I also think there's a story of like almost liberation in Carsa's story, because the Carsa in the first half of the book is very motivated by kind of what he views his culture is supposed to be, or like they have to go raid these villages to earn back honor for their tribe. And like he has a lot of outside reasons for why he wants to do things. Compared to Carsa at the end of the book, who goes through everything with the Talan Mas, he's still kind of violent and still kind of terrible, but he has his own motivations for being that way. And I think that's interesting. He's kind of the unchained character at the end of it, and he very much makes that point to be that way, which I thought was interesting.
I want to touch on Bob's comment here, and I think this one is a follow-up. Bob said, he, as in, I'm assuming Erickson, takes issue with total cultural relativism where people justify cultural practices that are inhumane, such as female genital mutilation. Like Erickson hates the romanticism of things like children being sacrificed, where we justify it by seeing cultures as barbaric or less civilized. And I think, like Carlos was touching on, you know, if you view it through that lens, which I believe personally is the lens Erickson was kind of trying to hold to the pages. You know, we have these romanticized views of history, of different eras, of different peoples, of different cultures, and it sounds good when we read it, kind of in history class or in books where it's usually the victors or parts of generations of the victors who are writing the history. It can sound good, but in practice, is it like we're
Yeah.
following a book in a series called the Malazan Book of the Fallen, and we know it's about an empire doing imperial things, and like the general tone of imperialism normally is like it's horrible.
Mhm.
But
I
then
think,
we're getting like people that we like in the Malazan Empire, so it creates
yeah,
conflict. And then we're kind of getting a part of that with Karsa, where he's from a culture that many people, at least many people in parts of the world that are reading this book, um, cannot empathize with at all, because it's a culture that is so far from anything that quote unquote civilized society deems to be okay.
yeah,
What forces us to question, like, is Karsa a horrible person? Because his motives are not, I'm doing these because they're horrible and I want to be a bad person. His motives are always, I'm doing this because I believe this is right. I believe
yeah,
this will get me this level of spiritual or religious or godly favor. I'm doing this for my people. He believes he's doing this for his people. And we as the reader are like, bro, like, is it worth it for your people? This is crazy. And he doesn't think that at all.
yeah. I think that's it. It's like the question of he poses the question of like uh what is there just because it's the way things are? What is ethical versus what is right? And can something be unethical and right at the same time? Can something be ethical and wrong? I like those are kind of the questions that he poses, I think.
Yeah, it really leaves it up to the reader to make that choice.
Mm.
I think
But
so.
I also think it's interesting that like Karsa seems to be this morally gray character, but at least within my experience of reading like that night in the camp before Tabor and Fellison faced off, and he's just murdering everyone. That was like the moral righteous retribution I've been looking for the whole book. And it was delivered by arguably, well, it's Karsa, probably the most amoral character, or at least like apathetic to morals character.
Yeah. I don't really think Karsa's a morally grey character. I think he's fairly black and white. I think he's also doing this because he wants to be strong, and he's clearly got some daddy and granddaddy issues, and he wants to be the hero that he thinks his ancestors were. And he wants to prove this strength that he has. And like his little tribe, they function in a certain way, and they even have their own little kind of eugenic system going on. And he thinks that because he is as strong as he is, he's just doing what is right. And whether he's doing that for himself or for his people is kind of irrelevant. But it's also like it's very open. Like he is very open with the decisions that he's making and kind of the abuse that he commits and like the rampaging and pillaging and whatever. But then you have a supposedly seemingly civilized colonial empire also doing similar things, but it's a little more shady. It's hidden. It's like you could question which is more evil. That's kind of what I like about Erickson as well. Is sure, in a lot of sort of stereotypical fantasy, you get the evil empire, and in like Star Wars, the empire, the colonial one is the evil one, and they just want to control, and it's evil and blah blah blah. And that's a little that can get a little boring, I guess, or a little one-dimensional. I just think there's a nuance with Erickson where he never explicitly tells you to think a certain thing about a certain group of people that he presents you with, which is why he has this huge tapestry of a world, and I think it's what I like most about it. And like, I'm Irish. I'm not predisposed to colonial empires, but it's also a fact of history and civilization that there has been good done in that, And I find that the most interesting of his.
I want to go ahead, Usman. Go ahead.
Yeah. No, Karsa. To start off with, like, I like the laser focus we have at the beginning with Karsa. I like reading stories that are very intimate with a character for a while, and
Yeah.
he goes through like a clear arc, and you see that he's capable of change, even though he's, you know, set in his ways at the beginning. But I think what Malazan has invoked in me as a reader is to never judge any character or like anything. Just, you know, look at it from all angles and don't, you know, I'm just more open to things now. I'm not like immediately like, oh, this guy's a horrible person, or that's a bad character, or whatever. So yeah, I think Karsa's a very interesting character, and the arc that he goes through is it resonates with me. And we can talk about the later stuff too.
He also kind of learns from, like, when he learns more truth about the fact that his dad didn't do what he
right.
What he thought he did, or, you know, he looked up to a certain idea of his father that wasn't necessarily true. And that is kind of a turning point for him in how he views himself and his kind of campaign, or whatever you want to call it.
That's a perfect pivot point, because I wanted to kind of touch on the fact that Erickson, Chaudia's comment here says his dad questions their culture.
Yeah.
And we also get, I think Erickson is feeding us a little bit of, I want to say, morality jabs with Karsa's dad, and also with Delum Thord, and his, what's the other guy's name? I forgot. Can't remember right now. Bayroth Guild, right? Bayroth.
Yeah.
They are not like just blindly following Karsa. They are questioning him.
Yeah.
They're trying to get him to question himself. So I think like, for me, when I read that, it was those characters were being used to kind of signal to the reader, like, hey, not everybody of the Tebler culture is like Karsa. Karsa is Karsa. Maybe, like, we don't think that everything the Tebler culture does is ethically correct, but not everybody is as crazy about it as Karsa is, because there's people of that culture that are questioning Karsa directly, and he's just like pretty stubborn in the beginning, but like Usman said, like, he does grow. He sees some things for what they are, not for what he was told that they are. And like Carlos said, he's just like, if this isn't what I was told, maybe everything isn't what I was told it is.
Yeah. I also think his companion that he meets, I always forget his name. Is it Torvald? He also helps him.
Torvald Mom.
Yeah, he also kind of helps him break down this idea of the, you know, idiot children to be subjugated, you know?
Bob, that was the best part of the book. I don't know if you're in our Discord, but the whole time I'm reading this book, I was like, when is Bidethal going to get it? I keep reading his name. I keep forgetting he hasn't been murdered yet, and it's making me angry.
Somehow. Bob says, you could argue every faction has issues with slave trade, the Tebler culture of rape and pillaging, and even the rebellion itself, all of which members within have the agency to reject and take part in. Yeah, and this is true of, like, many different colonial empires. Obviously, you know, over the course of history, where, like, yeah, slaves, the use of slave trade and, like, colonization and taking lands over by force and forcing people out of it, like, there's a choice. Like, you don't have, like, an empire doesn't have to do that. They don't have to exercise that power. They can choose to take the moral high ground and, like, not use slaves. Maybe they won't be as profitable, but they won't be using humans to make a profit off of, which is just, like, you know. But I think Erickson forces the reader, like, puts the reader in real time scenarios where we have to read this stuff for ourselves and think about how the idea of colonization, the idea of imperialism, the idea of different cultures is not usually just a simple black and white, because he's allowing us to meet actual characters that are parts of these things that we don't inherently hate, like the characters themselves in the Malazan Empire. We don't just hate them because they're bad, and they're part of an empire. Like, we like Whiskey Jack, we like certain characters, even though we know that they're part of something inherently bad. And I like that Erikson forces us as readers to question things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think I would even question the fact that it is inherently bad. And like, yes, I guess in essence it's bad, but you can always look at intentions behind things. And I think Erikson leaves all of that open with, let's say, how the Malazan Empire go about their expansion or whatever, or these sort of little mini rules and codes of conduct that each individual subsection conduct themselves by, or these kinds of. He doesn't tell you one way or another, these people are inherently bad because what they're doing is inherently bad. Is it, or is it just where that civilization is at that time? It's a little more, I don't know. It's a little difficult to answer, or to make up your mind one way or the other.
I do love Torval Nom and Karsa's duo. I like their scenes together are probably some of my favorites, particularly like in the garden when Karsa's in his sculpture phase.
Yeah.
Karsa the artist.
Yeah, Karsa the artist. But going back to just, again, the way Erikson kind of tackles moral relativism, or like the lack of good guys, I think it's interesting how much of the book focuses on the rebellion leadership and just how not focused on like the moral prerogative of just rebelling against the Malazan Empire is. Like, it's not really about making the world better. It's not really about liberation. It's mostly just about Shaik kind of ascending to her god form and getting revenge.
Mm-hmm.
And she's accompanied by that serial pedophile mutilator and Karsa.
It's also just funny that we love that Bidethal gets his comeuppance, and we find it satisfying when he does, and it's ironic that it's Karsa who does it, when you could argue from a point of moral relativism that there's not much difference between the two of them. But it's like that thing that I was saying before, that because Bidethal is, sort of seedy, and like he is supposedly on the side of civilized discipline, and he's doing this in a shady way, kind of it is just a more inherently icky way to go about this kind of stuff that he does. And Karsa goes about it very openly, very like, here, I am here to fuck shit up.
Yeah.
And he just does. Yeah. That's funny that we sort of view them differently. And I think that's just the inherent thing that makes it interesting,
I think in the same vein, and this kind of leads to something I want to say about Erikson, who has just a real penchant for making us question on so many levels things that we think we have already made our mind up on. Surov says the Malazan Empire has actually banned slavery everywhere they conquered. Silver Lake was just not that much in their control to fully eradicate it, but the Malazans put the slave master in his place. So again, like, we are taught most of the time imperialism is inherently bad. Here is an empire that is conquering, is doing lots of imperial things, but they're eradicating slavery. So that's good. Like, he uses characters, he uses plot threads, he uses grand ideas, themes to, I think, really just force the reader into, like, if you're asked just a shotgun question, like, is imperialism bad? Your immediate answer would be like, yes. Well, then it's like, well, what if they're conquering places that have slavery and they're eradicating slavery? And you're like, okay, they're conquering, which is bad, but they are eradicating slavery, which is good. okay, let me rethink my, like, he does that again and again and again over the course of this book. This book specifically, I think a lot of, in the series so far too.
But
Mhm.
also, whatever the intention is behind the grand vision of that imperialism, there are always going to be individuals or subgroups within that will have their own agendas that are not good. And that's where all the trouble comes. You're welcome, Matt. I couldn't hold it in any longer.
Hey, talk about a book where people have their own agendas.
Yeah.
This is a good one for that, I think. And we'll get there. So I don't know where you guys want to go next. I think it would probably do to bring up the main tie between this book that we eventually realize and Deadhouse Gates, involving Karsa and another character named Leoman of the Flails, I believe. We find out something about Karsa that I didn't put together myself until Erickson made it very obvious to me. Did you guys put it together?
Yes, unfortunately, but only because I slightly spoiled myself by Googling something I shouldn't have.
It's been so long that there are parts that I can't remember until maybe you guys bring them up. So in this case, I don't know what the heck you're talking about. Maybe bring it up, then I can be like, oh yeah, that.
Yeah,
I guess
so you're referencing Colin.
Spoilers for Deadhouse Gates is that, and House of Change is that Karsa is the Toblakai.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's what you're talking about. Yeah. So
Right.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Would you find that out like right at the end of that first sub book? Yeah, I was surprised, but I'm also surprised by everything. I think I get so lost in like what's going on that Erickson could tell me literally anything. I'm like, oh my gosh, I didn't see it coming.
Hi, Rogier.
The Malazan Book of No Easy Answers.
I think that's all of them. I think that's the title for all of them, actually.
That would be a harder title to sell. Book of the Fallen sounds better.
This is the interesting thing about the series, though. Like, Erickson got an Irish lad talking good things about an imperial, Indian and colonialism and all this kind of stuff. And I'm like, well, imperialism isn't too bad. My God, my granddad be rolling in his grave.
That's true. So anyways, we can't go into everything unless you guys want to be here for like 4 hours. But I think this would be a good way to propel us forward in the narrative too. So Karsa, fast forward, some major things that happen is held prisoner by a Malazan regime, I believe. Anyone can correct me at all. Anyone in the chat, you guys can correct me if I'm wrong because it's been a while since I read this. So anyways, Karsa is captured by Malazan regime. He escapes with a prisoner he meets there named Leoman. They flee to Raraku, and they eventually hitch up with the Shaik's army, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And then they kind of just get hired on as bodyguards. I don't know, members of the force, the rebellion,
the gang.
The gang. So more or less, that's a big tie between Deadhouse Gates, I think, and this one.
Yeah, and it's kind of it's the thread I was looking for in that sub book of like why is any of this relevant? And then you realize that was just his long journey to getting into Raraku and Shaik's entourage.
Yeah,
which I thought was interesting.
Yeah, and I think when I came away from the book, I kind of wanted Erickson to go all out and make this Karsa's book and have his perspective in there. But I think it would have also been important to have, obviously one or two more perspectives. And one of those is like Heboric or Heboric, however you say it, and the kind of subplot around Fellison. And the Shaik, which, we want to go full spoilers. The end of the book is pretty heartbreaking because Malazan, one of my favorite characters, that through line from Deadhouse Gates, I think, deserves its place in the book. looking back on it, for me, I probably would have cut out some of the Onrak and Troll stuff. It kind of dragged a little. I wasn't necessarily interested in it when I was reading it, but I did know it's gonna be setting stuff up in the future. And then I went on, I read Midnight Tides, but I still think it didn't need to all be in the same book. Like, make it 11, but make the series 11 books, Stephen. You know. But
Yeah.
Yeah, and that really is like my big thing. Like, I understand like Troll and Amtos's arc is like directly connected to Shaik, but I feel like I could have gotten that later. I didn't feel like I needed all of it in this book.
Yeah.
Because I would say of these four, well, maybe Gardens of the Moon is a little more or less focused, but I felt like this one was very meandering. And like, even though we're heading towards like this like climactic event with the conflict between the Malazans and the rebel army, I didn't really feel like the book was going anywhere in the same way I felt like it was in Memories of Ice and Deadhouse Gates, especially.
Yeah.
I just kept wanting to get back to Karsa, if I'm being honest. Like his whole arc was great. I think the starting point was definitely at the beginning, where he was learning about how his father or his grandfather, the lies that he portrayed, and his kind of that's where it started to shift. But later on, like when he's in the cave and he's forging this new sword and talking to his gods, right? They're having a discussion on they're talking about the crippled god and how they're trying to create more imperfection, like this whole chat about perfection versus imperfection. I thought that scene in the cave was definitely one of the best parts for me, where he's forging a sword and he's talking about the children, right? Because one of them is it's been so long, but she's like taking the children from their parents or something, and he's talking about the love between parents and their child and how it's immune to imperfection. That was a line that probably the only line in the book where I was thinking, I don't know exactly what to make of that. I don't know if that's true or not. What do you guys think about?
If I'm remembering the line you're talking about correctly, I think that line made me cry.
Yeah,
I'm pretty sure it did.
I loved Karsa's whole arc of like going to the plains and getting his new sword. Like, those were my favorite parts of the book. Every time I read a new scene that started with Karsa, I was like, fuck yeah. Now we're back in business. Maybe this is just me misreading the book, because I try to avoid reading anything online even when I'm confused. Was it not the case that he found out that the Toblekai gods were fake and they were actually just Talon and Mas manipulating them?
Yeah.
And that's why he kills the 7 after he makes that sword.
Yeah.
That's when I was like locked in on Karsa. I already enjoyed his like arc, but I was like, Karsa's great. God killer.
Yeah, 100%. I'm with you. I can't say like I liked him. I just enjoyed following his absolute wrath of badassery. Because even though Erickson is writing this sort of commentary on barbarian culture and like sort of, I guess, questioning things and even questioning the fantasy genre itself, where you kind of deify these characters like Conan, like, I don't know who else, Beowulf even. I read Beowulf just before reading this book, and I was like, oh my god, he's Beowulf. He's a real asshole, but he's a badass.
He does cool stuff.
And I'll be damned if I don't like it when he fights a large demon with a massive sword. You know, it's just cool. But Erickson also writes it that way because it is cool. But he still has you questioning those things, which is kind of my favorite thing to do. Like, I often hate the word deconstruction, It sounds pretentious and kind of cynical in a way. I don't know why, but he does it from a place of also thinking that this shit is cool. And I like that. Yeah.
Mhm.
So yeah, I'm with you, Caleb.
I definitely think that's probably my favorite thing about Malazan so far, just broadly speaking, is I do feel like it's like very deep, very intellectual. There's a lot of philosophy going on in it. And then there's also just rule of cool. It's happening because it's awesome.
Yeah, it's happening because it's fucking cool. Yeah.
Yep. So
Well,
I love that.
I knew that this would inevitably happen because I did try to skirt past a few of the things in the
Oh yeah.
idea that we can. So yeah, with the Solanda, this was a fun scene. There was a lot of little fun scenes like this that give us like tie-ins. I kind of realized where we were. This was in the Nascent, right? The Warren of the Nascent.
The Warren, yeah.
So yeah, like in Deadhouse Gates, they walk into the boat, and obviously the Tista Edor are just dead, and now we get to see why that happened. That was pretty cool. So Troll, I feel like I personally don't have a ton to say about Troll and Onrak in this book, but from what I understand, I don't know if Usman and Caleb, if you know this yet, I'm assuming this is going to be very important stuff for the next book.
For Troll, yeah, I think Onrak, I struggled to give a shit for the entirety of his story in the book until the end. But it didn't retroactively make me give a shit about his story, really, which was unfortunate. And you know, that's just me. That's my taste thing for that book. But I think it was inherently because there was such a focus on Karsa and that singular kind of perspective, and even some of the other POVs just sort of swirling around Karsa, that my brain was not in the space to give a shit about Onrak or Troll, really.
Same.
Even though Troll is a great character, and when you guys read Midnight Tides, it will be great. And yes, Onrak, we do get some like recontextualizing of what came before from Deadhouse Gates and Memories of Ice. It's just, it could have been in a different book, even though it's,
so,
you know.
I'm frustrated by this because I understand that the reason that we probably get this is because everything that's happening, like the Whirlwind Goddess, the reason the Whirlwind Goddess exists is because of Onrak, right? And that's the majority of what Deadhouse Gates and House of Chains is about, the background overarching plot. I feel like if I would have known that in the beginning of when we first meet Onrak, it would have made all of the storylines between Onrak Troll or Onrak and Troll Sangar way more interesting to me. Like, even if he was like trying to skirt around the area and hide the fact that this whole thing was his fault, I would have been more invested had I known that early instead of at the very end.
There could have also been major hints that he drops, because Erickson is very good with just telling you shit out straight that you need to pay attention to, but there's so much that you need to like kind of register that shit just slips past you that seems real obvious. Or it could be the case that he intentionally withheld it as sort of a twist, and then when you go back and reread the books, then it's interesting. But I'm with you. Maybe I would have wanted even a larger hint about why I should be into this guy, and then more hints along the way, because he doesn't naturally do that, where he introduces you to a new set of characters in a new place, and then you go along with it and you sort of get into the story, and you have that patience to see where it's going. I just think because he made the decision to focus on Karsa early on, and everything was building up around that, I think he should have done a little more to pepper that in if he wants all this in the same book, which he did because it's published as one book. If it's separated, problem solved. I'm okay. It could stay exactly the same. But yeah, I think it's inherently just because the book is structured the way it is. Sorry, somebody else.
I totally agree. And I think it'd probably even be fine if he took the route he took with Carson in the beginning, and all of Troll and Onrak's chapters were just like one sub book.
Yeah.
I would have enjoyed that. So
Who's
That
the
is
who's the
funny.
one who had a bout with Karsa in the middle there? Was that Troll? You went like
no,
head on
are you
right?
talking about when he finds Icarium and what's Icarium? Mappa.
Oh yeah,
Mappa.
okay. It was
Um,
it
that was
was
the other
Ikarium. It was Ikarium, right?
other mild disappointment about this book. I was really hoping to get more Mappa and Icarium. So I
So
love
was
that
I.
scene. I wish there was more because I
So
love
was I. Yeah.
I
because
feel like for me, it's like Mappo and Akarium, and then Onrak and Troll.
Oh, 100%.
Like,
100%.
I care so much more about what's happening
So
with
much.
Mappo and Akarium, and then Onrak and. But it is what it is. I mean, like I enjoyed it, but like you guys were saying, like and I kind of want to move on to another couple of the storylines that I was heavily invested in because there's so many. I mean, Surov mentioned we've got Crocus and Absalar, who I really liked following before, but in this book, I was
Not at
less
all.
invested. And like you're like to know that I have to wait for Midnight Tides and Bone Hunters to get why this stuff in House of Chains matters is kind of frustrating. It's kind of makes the series, yes, impressive and makes me want to reread it and all that. But like this is a really long book. And like you did all this setup, but the other thing that I kind of wanted to talk to you guys about, because I thought like I found this very interesting when I was reading this, is kind of juxtaposing the rebellion army versus the Malazan army with Tavor. We don't really know anything about Tavor until we get to this book, aside from hearsay. She's just kind of a character in the background. And we do know kind of a lot about Felison and what has happened to her by the hands of Tavor, essentially. So I had already had like a kind of, I was judging Tavor before I got to meet her. Maybe unfairly, maybe not, but like I knew Felison and I knew that like because of things that Tavor did, Felison has had to suffer a lot. And so I found that these two characters kind of operating separately for the majority of this book until the very end, and watching their storylines, watching how Felison was kind of, I don't know, like I felt like she was broken, she was lost, she stumbled into this army, like not a trained army. It's just this like ragtag group of people that all have their own camps, all have their own motives, are all trying to get their own things accomplished. Very unorganized for the most part. It felt like to me. I don't know if it was a lack of leadership, but I found that interesting in comparing that with Tavor's army, who was also fairly inexperienced, and then Tavor having to kind of battle the ghost of Coltane and not feeling like she was living up to the legend of Coltane and having to earn her respect from her troops. Like I found following both of their journeys as generals of their army and leaders of their army was really interesting. I don't know if you guys like these storylines, but I was really invested in both of these storylines a lot.
No, I very much enjoyed Tavor's, especially, I think, because I really liked seeing, because like we got this, at least I got the impression in Dead House Gates that Tavor was cruel and calculating and ruthless, and then you see her and she's really just a young woman wrestling with power, and like power in an area that she's not familiar with soldiers she's not familiar with, and who kind of inherently don't respect her because of that. I found that very interesting. Felison's I struggled with a bit more just because I feel like we didn't really get enough of Felison. Like we saw quite a bit of Shaik, but there's really only 2 scenes where we like genuinely see Felison. I would have liked a little bit more of that personally, because the scenes we did get with her, I thought were great.
Yeah, I agree. I think Tavor, it's interesting that we think that in Dead House Gates, because what we know about Tavor is maybe what Felison thinks about Tavor. And we're sort of endearing ourselves to Felison in Dead House Gates, or well, I guess if you go on to Malazan subreddits, maybe not. But it's you always get what other people think about Tavor, which is interesting as well. I don't know if it's intentional, but like he puts a woman in a position of power in the military, and you only ever get other people's opinions of her. Now I know he's kind of created a world that doesn't have, sexism in it, or that kind of gender hierarchy and roles as such. But it is also just interesting how we, the reader, then take that perception that other characters have of her and go, oh, she's probably cold and calculating and, probably shouldn't like her or whatever. And the closer we get to her circle, you start to change. I found her storyline in this interesting. Fellison, I agree, Caleb, because she was my favorite character kind of in Deadhouse Gates, apart from Mappo and Ikarium. Nobody's touching that. I did want a little more. Here.
A little more of Fellison besides the Shaik.
Yeah.
Fellison outside of her like possession by Shaik.
Yeah.
You know, it's funny. I think, I would agree. I wanted that too, but I think the way he did it just made the finale that much more of a gut punch, because it just comes out of nowhere and you see the real Fellison, and it's just such a shock. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean that is true.
So
I think
tragic.
it does. There's something to like the emotional punch of that. Like she is so disengaged in her own story that when she finally does come to and she's confronted with her sister, she doesn't even have the strength to lift up the armor she's wearing. Before her sister spears her.
Cyril, so we see here how much Tavor actually cares about Fellison and the lengths to which she went to protect Fellison, which is kind of what I wanted to touch on. So yet another duo of characters that I wish I cared more about were Lestara Yil and what's his name?
I can't remember his name.
Pearl.
Pearl.
That's right. So yeah, I mean, like, and then there's Kalam mixed up in there, who's another character I loved, but like not so much in this book. It's just there was too much going on for me. Anyways, I appreciated a lot that Tavor basically hired Lestara Yil and Pearl. We start to see through Tavor's actions when we get closer to her circles, like you were talking about, Carlos. All the stuff that she's had to do has been eating at her. Like, she's not a robot. She's not like, she has emotions. I think she is pitted in this really difficult position where she's now in a position of such power that doesn't allow her to make decisions like she would just out of, the goodness of her heart or whatnot.
Yeah.
And we're just, I mean, at least for me, the whole time I'm thinking like Tavor is kind of a bitch. Like she cares more about power than her family. She's abandoned her family. She's abandoned her house. That's not entirely true. I mean, it's partially true, but it's not entirely true. We see that she's going through like these back channels to try to make sure like it's kind of been eating her up. She's like, yeah, I had to make a decision to either kill Fellison or have her killed outright or send her to go be, a slave worker in the mines, which she knew the conditions were horrible, but she was like, okay, does she live and have to suffer and I can maybe reconvene with her someday and explain myself or try to, or do I just kill her?
Yeah.
Difficult. Who the heck would ever want to be in that position? But it humanized Tavor, who to me was kind of like a legendary character up to this point. Like we'd heard a lot, but hadn't gotten to see the reasons for her decisions and stuff like that. And I really enjoyed like just getting to know her better and how much she did care about Perrin and Fellison and how she couldn't show her emotions and also garner the respect of the men and women that she was trying to lead in this army. Like she couldn't be vulnerable. She couldn't afford to be vulnerable and also get an army together to take down the rebellion at the same time. Like she had to pick one.
Mm-hmm.
It's also like whose expectations is she trying to live up to as well? Because like, Ganos, her brother, is obviously off doing big things as well. And she probably feels like she has to live up to the Paran name. And she might because we're never in her head, we don't actually know how she feels about what she's doing, which is very interesting in itself. And it's kind of just us projecting what we might think she's feeling. And it's only the closer we get to her circle that we start, I guess, considering how she feels. And also, Lestariel and Pearl, while I agree the like storyline and stuff there is not the most interesting, I do really love their banter.
Yeah.
And I did read that he based a lot of that on, or Erickson based a lot of that on him and his wife, which I think is great.
That's hilarious.
Yeah,
That's fantastic.
Because Lestar basically hates Pearl for the majority of the book.
yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I thought I was just really fascinated by that, and like thinking back on, you know, all the things that they both had to go through to get to where they were.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting, again, kind of what you were saying, Colin, like she's kind of made out to be a bitch or made out to be like power hungry. But again, the closer we got to her, the more I felt like she was just a woman who had genuine faith in her empire and like what it was doing was right and the needs of her family. And she was divided between the two of those things, which I thought was interesting. So
yeah, well, we never got, before this, we never got a lot of her. And I was just waiting. Like, I wasn't judging her. I was just like waiting to get her perspective or get a little more of the story to see what was actually happening.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's good that we got that. But, man, so tragic.
Yeah, so tragic. So Erickson obviously like really goes out of his way to make morally gray characters at the very least, or like question what is good and evil. And then we have characters like Bidethal, who is the most flagrantly evil fucker I've ever read in a book.
Yeah. Totally deserved it. And, it's the most satisfying moment in the book. I'm totally with you.
100%.
Most satisfying.
100%.
Yeah.
Which again, I think is interesting in our sense of like we talked a lot about like what is morality, what is and isn't good or bad in cultural contexts. But even then, like I feel like collectively as readers, we still have like a righteous outrage to very specific things. And again, Karsa, arguably not the moral paragon of the book, is the harbinger of justice.
Which is just a very poetic part of the book, to be honest. It's great. He acts like he's the Punisher, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Like Frank Castle isn't the greatest person in the world, but when the Punisher kills the worst person in existence, you're like, yeah,
that was good.
Yeah.
This is still like, this is one part of just like, I'm just the rebellion army camp just felt like to me it was it felt like it was doomed to fail from the beginning, because it felt like there were so many people in that camp, powerful people of different levels that just had their own agendas the whole time. And Bidethal obviously was one of those. He was one of the characters that kind of fell flat for me in terms of like, because most of what he was doing was he was basing it off of his religion, right? Like it was this House of Shadows or something. I forget exactly.
Like I knew he was part of the House of Shadows. I thought he was trying to build a cult around himself.
Okay, maybe that's true. I think so. I think it was all tied into somehow like Lestariel's small backstory that we get. If I'm not 100% right on this, somebody please. So I think it's coming back to me now. I think what I remember is when we were getting the fact that Lestariel used to be like a shadow dancer or something. I think Bidethal is connected to that. And then we also learned that the person that saved Lestariel from that cult was Quickben.
Oh my
I'm
God.
pretty sure.
I can't remember this at all.
Yeah.
I think. So I think that whole thing is tied together, and I think that she hates Bidethal and that cult of shadows for that reason. I might be wrong about that. I don't remember, but I remember Quickben being brought up at some point.
But you're right about all the characters who just had their own agenda, and I was just, for the longest time, I was just waiting for it all to crumble. You know, that whole
Crumble did, because even Hebrew, who I really enjoyed in Dead House of Gates, I really struggle with his like just general apathy towards everything happening in the camp. Like, yeah, he tried to go off his way to protect Fellowson Younger, and really that was about it, and he fucked that up.
Yeah. I think I think you could kind of see it as a bit of original OG Fellison's apathy to everything infecting him in a way, because he thinks he failed. He ultimately failed. Like his whole thing that he failed. And he's trying to help Fellowson Younger, but he himself is just, he doesn't even believe in himself anymore. And I think that's kind of, I guess, the point of why he is the way he is in House of Chains. But I do agree. I struggled with him in this. I struggled reading it. There was huge chunks of this book that I felt weren't paced in a way that had an intentional reason in terms of like manipulating how you feel. Like with Dead House Gates, for me, the Chain of Dogs is a slog, but the Chain of Dogs is a slog because it's supposed to.
It is.
Because it is. And when you get to the end of that book, you're kind of just as exhausted as all these soldiers. And then it just ends in absolute tragedy. And you're like, oh my God, I'm drained. My soul has just leaked onto the floor. Whereas House of Chains, there are huge chunks of it that I just feel drag because they drag. And yes, I understood how Heberic, I don't know how to say it, Heberic, I understand how he was feeling, and I got it, but then it got repetitive a little.
And it started to turn into, I was not sure how he was actually contributing to the story.
Yeah.
Beyond, because like I understand intellectually what you're saying, Carlos. On like, it kind of gives us insight on like, he views himself as a failure. Like, not only did he fail Fellowson, he's failed his god. There's multiple points where he even questions if he'll go to the afterlife. So, and I like all of that intellectually, but I just didn't really feel like it went anywhere. I mean, like, he becomes what's he called? He's aligned with Treach now.
Yeah, that's right.
So, what is he?
It's not Destrian, is it?
I think it is Destrian. I think he is Destrian.
Oh, is it?
So, because the guy from Memories of Ice is the sword. Is that what he's called?
Oh, I don't remember all the terms, but yeah, Treach is the tiger guy. Is that the tiger guy?
Yeah, he's the tiger
guy.
Yeah.
I forgot his name. In my brain, he's the tiger guy.
So, like, obviously, that makes me feel like Hebrew is going to become very relevant in like the later books. But in this book, I just struggled with what he really added.
Shield, anvil. There you go. Mortal sword, destriant, and shield.
Yeah. So a lot of the comments, as I'm glad that they did and always do, are reminding me of things. So Bob says, by the way, thoughts on how Cotillion reads in this book. This leads into like the point that I was trying to make between Lestari Yiel and the Shadow Dancing being like an assassin's kind of guild or cult. Cotillion, I think, is connected to that somehow as well, because he is the master assassin. So there's a lot of stuff I don't understand there yet, but I think is tied together somehow.
Now,
and Lestari Yiel is a part of it.
Am I getting this mixed up? Cotillion is Dancer, right? And he's
Yes.
the Knight of Shadows, right? Is he the Knight of Shadows, or is he
Knight of High House Shadow, something like that?
Yeah.
He's a killer.
He's a killer.
Cotillion is the rope, right?
Is Cotillion the rope, or is Cotillion Dancer?
I think Cotillion is. Oh my god.
Well, I thought Cotillion is Dancer, but he's like the robe, which is like the rank in the houses.
Right.
The deck of
Oh,
dragons makes no
And-
sense to me still. So
Kellen Ved is what's his face?
he's
Shadow Throne.
Throne.
Shadow Throne. Thank you. Okay, we're back on track. Yes.
But Cotillion is a kind of dance, so that makes sense that that's Dancer.
yes.
That's how I remember it.
Yeah.
I
My
don't
god,
know.
all the names in this.
Somebody is going to correct us.
Well, I do love when Cotillion shows up and murders a bunch of people.
Multiple people. Cotillion equals the rope equals Dancer. Yes.
Beautiful.
I
You
feel
guys
like
are the best.
what I really struggle with right now is I feel like I would appreciate this a lot more if I really had any context for who Kellenbed and Dancer were before they ascended.
I don't know.
I feel like there's a prequel trilogy that I'm assuming is about that, but
There is. I think it's Path to Ascendancy goes into it with Dancer's Lament is the first book, I believe.
Oh.
I know this because I have been kind of sort of digging into that because I want to know which of the Esselmont books I'm going to read after the 10.
Only
but-
5,000 pages left to go in the series. And
yeah.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. Well, I'm like Caleb. I just want to know more of that. So I'm looking up, okay, where can I get that? Okay, Dancer's Lament. Cool. That's what I'm fucking reading. But I think I picked up kind of immediately in Gardens of the Moon that Cotillion and Shadow Throne were the Emperor and his right-hand lad. And that just kind of made me interested. And I like that we don't really know anything about them before because it creates this aura. And quite often with mysteries, that aura and that kind of drip feeding you is more, what's a good word? Titillating than reveals to me. And we're getting more and more information as the kind of series progresses. Yes, at a slow pace, like I'm 5,000 pages in, and all I know is that they are who they are. But yeah. Oh, cool. Thanks, Sarav.
Another thing I forgot that happened was this. That was a cool scene.
The crucified dragon. What was that?
That was Lestari Yil and Pearl, just like
Right.
in a Warren, and they wandered.
Yep.
They wandered up to like a literal crucified dragon, and we're like, "What is that?"
Yeah. Oh my God! Do we learn more about that in later books? People in the chat, tell us.
Apparently, we do.
Pay attention to that. Important.
Great.
RAFO.
And I kind of going back to like the rule of cool stuff. Sorry, my kids are talking in the background.
Kids will do that.
They do that. But going back to like the rule of cool, something I do enjoy, even though I don't feel like we necessarily get any of it in this book beyond maybe that Atadaro Dragon thing, is I love the really interpersonal conflicts that are going on in the midst of this like empire at war with itself. And then above that is this like intensely epic scope battle for existence between the Warrens and the gods that I don't feel like we have any context on really yet. All we know is from Memories of Ice, Quick Ben has that vision seeing Burns' ribcage collapsing. And saying that I was like, oh, that's probably bad because I think that's their planet. So I feel like things like the Tarot Dragon or like just the glimpses we're seeing in the Warrens is continuing to build up to that conflict with what I'm assuming is the crippled guy, since that's the last book.
You get a lot more of the Warrens and what's going on with them at Midnight Tides as well, even though none of the characters that came before are really anywhere to be found in Midnight Tides. It's kind of an entirely new cast. And
That's what I understand. Isn't it also like millennia before these books? Isn't it like a severe prequel?
It is set before, but not. I don't know if it's that long before.
Is it like the story of how Troll Sengar got stuck?
It basically when Troll sits down to tell his sort of tale at the end of House of Chains, is what I believe you are being told in Midnight Tides.
Okay.
More or less.
Right on.
Yeah.
So that's why Onrak and Troll were so important in House of Chains.
Pretty much.
And aside from the fact that Onrak caused the Whirlwind Goddess to like happen.
Onrak, yeah, that's why Troll's important. But yeah. And I'm sure then kind of the fallout of Midnight Tides and what we learn in Midnight Tides about some of these characters then carries on into the second half of the series, you know?
I think you do get a group. Don't forget about the Jade statues. I did forget about the Jade statues completely.
I didn't. I've been thinking about them.
What are your thoughts on the Jade statues, Caleb?
Nothing in particular other than like they're in the back of my mind because I remember in Dead House Gates, like, you know, Hebert touches that jade obelisk that looks like a finger coming out. I'm like, that seems like that's really important and probably bad. Yes. And then he references it a couple times in this book. So, and I'm assuming that's the crippled god. I mean, I'm probably wrong, but that's what I think.
Yeah.
2 to 3 years before Guardians of the Moon. I read the not the synopsis, but kind of like the book summary today as I was preparing for this chat, and I said Troll Sengar, Tistadura. I'm like, that probably took place thousands of years ago.
You know, something I'm really hoping that we get more of later on is this lore that we got with the Bridge Burners and Raraku and this song that
cool, yeah.
And something about Ascension.
That was cool.
Very interesting.
And the ghosts of the Bridge Burners
Spirit
like
Walker
literally being in
song.
the camp.
Yeah. Seems like they have a very past history, and it has to do with the desert. And somehow, like, they can die and ascend or something. Something odd was happening. And I'm like,
if they return there,
right,
something like that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think
they started there.
Yeah, the Bridge Burners were formed in Raraku, so there's this sort of, I don't know, some magic shit going on there.
Circles are magical.
Yeah.
Yeah, because
we know that.
I think it's Quick Ben's POV in Memories of Ice that talks about like that first campaign they had in Raraku and how it hardened them and probably permanently changed them.
Isn't that where we learned that Quick Ben, you know, taps into all his warrens?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think so, yeah.
Speaking of Quick Ben, every time he's in the book, it's just he's got some badass parts, you know.
I know. Not enough Quick Ben. Quick Ben has to be in every book.
I think Quick Ben is one of the best characters. Like, and
I agree. I think immediately when we had our very first spoiler discussion, all of us were like, there are some really cool characters in this book, but Quick Ben is like probably the most badass.
S tier. I don't know. It's tough between that and Animander Rake, and now Karsa. I'm developing my S tier. So
yeah.
After we
here's Surov explaining. So the Tano Spirit Walker and Dead House Gates made a song for the Bridge Burners, and then Perrin blessed them at the end of Memories of Ice. That combination made them ascend, though most are dead at this point. Okay.
I think once we finish the series, we all need to we all need to have a chat like this and create a tier list of characters and argue about it relentlessly for 4 hours.
Yes,
100%. Yep. Yeah, because even like only five books in, it was a struggle for me to make a top 10 characters. And then all the comments I got were like, "Where's Fiddler?" I'm like, "Look, there's 10 other characters."
Another top 10 Malazan character.
I know
finish the series and do a video with like relating to some metal songs, like
that would be sweet.
I would love that.
I know it is getting fairly late for Carolos, so in the spirit pun intended for the Spirit Walkers, of propelling this chat forward. I wanted to kind of ask your guys' opinion about how this one ends, because for me, I think Gardens of the Moon, I've made this comparison before. Gardens of the Moon felt like Christmas morning to me. Like I'm just running around opening a bunch of presents, opening a bunch of storylines. I don't know what everything is yet. I don't know how it works, but this is a blast. And then for Deadhouse Gates, Memories of Ice, and for House of Chains, they all three hit me deeply emotionally at the end, but in very distinct ways. All three of them.
Mm-hmm.
So how did the ending of this shape up against the other three books for you guys? Whoever wants to start, you can go ahead.
I think it was very risky, I think, of Erickson to like do an anticlimax, especially when like this very long meandering book is building towards that climax. I think that was a bold move, and I think for me emotionally, it pays off quite a bit. One, because we kind of essentially get a climax the night before when Karsa is on his rampage. But I think there was something touching, and there was something about just how small the end was of this book. Like I wouldn't call it intimate, but everyone is very internalized at the end of this book, particularly Tavor, who learns Felison's dad is lied to about how she dies. He just kind of accepts it, and that's really the end of the book. I think there's something, I can't really articulate it now, but I think there's really something to going from like collapsing an entire city by crashing Moonspawn into it in the end of Memories of Ice to this.
I think, it's like Deadhouse Gates has the sort of exhausting, I have been on a trip ending. Memories of Ice is just epic as fuck. It's just bananas. It's balls to the wall, and it's probably my favorite ending. Well, Midnight Tide's ending is great, but we can't go there. This one was a little more muted, but I think it was probably needed after Memories of Ice. Just, okay, this is just a bunch of people reacting to where we are now. And some of it is pretty tragic, and some of it is like, well, what's Karsa going to go off and do? That's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So there's it's a little bit of like, not necessarily anticlimax, but I guess there's an emotional weight to it.
Yeah.
It's in terms of sort of feeling a high, it's a bit of an anticlimax, but I think there's an emotion to it, an intimacy, like you said, and I guess setup, because I want to know what Karsa's gonna do now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it builds things up very nicely, and then like gently brings them all into this intimate kind of tragic thing that really just like, gently caresses your heart or whatever. It's like, it's very tragic, and also leaves some like questions that you want answered, more not so grand, like not so grand questions, some more immediate questions you want answered, like, what's Karsa gonna do? What and remind me, is Tavor aware that she just killed her sister, or
she's not?
No,
she's not.
No, she knows she's dead, but she's not aware. Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, I thought I heard something.
That was due to Yeel and Pearl, right? They made the decision autonomously once they knew it was Felison not to tell Tavor, because they knew it would wreck her.
Yeah.
And Eel hides her body, if I remember correctly, or runs off with it.
Yeah, so that, and then Karsa and the bridge burners, those questions, along with all these super grand scale stuff. I can't wait to continue.
I think this is the first book that I didn't want the big conflict to happen. Like, I was kind of dreading it. I didn't want Felison and Tavor to fight.
Yeah.
I didn't want their armies to clash. And afterwards, I was telling Usman, one of the podcasts that I listened to is called the 10 Very Big Books podcast. So if you guys don't know about it, highly recommend any Malazan fan to listen to that. It's awesome. But they discuss this in depth, and they kind of Erickson has been on the podcast, and he said that after Gardens of the Moon, Dead House Gates, and Memories of Ice, all three of those books are kind of ramping up the pressure and the intensity and the battle, the scales of everything, and he knew that he couldn't keep that up. So he had to pivot away from that and have this kind of ending where it was, I don't even know if anticlimactic is, I guess that would kind of be the word. Like, it really is like, I'm anticipating this big, like the whole book, I was anticipating this big clash, but I didn't want it to happen. I was kind of dreading it in a way. And then I didn't foresee this happening, and it was even more tragic, because then both of the armies are like, well, what the heck do we do now? A handful of people know what really just went down. Like, most of the people just think that the whirlwind goddess is dead. They don't realize that Tavor just literally executed her sister, who she's been actively trying to save. And after all this journeying that Lestari, Yil, and Pearl go on over the course of this whole book, they finally find Felison, but they find Felison dead at the hands of the person that hired them to find her. So, like, it's this moral conundrum where, like, I don't even know if them not telling her is the right thing. Like, wouldn't you want to know? Like, how is this going to come out later? Like, if they know and they didn't tell her, she's going to be furious later that they knew all this time and they never told her. So, like, there was a lot of things going through my mind after the close of this book.
That conversation is going to happen as well, and it's going to be tough, and it's just more Erickson tragedy. But I think there is actually a massive climax in this book, and it is, Caleb knows, it is when Karsa fucks up Bidethal.
Yeah.
And that's your moment where you're like, yes, because the real book here is Karsa's book, and that's kind of the climax.
Yep. And I love that Erickson just gives us the moment of Bidethal waking up in the afterlife, realizing he's going to be ravaged by demons. That was intensely cathartic for me.
Yeah.
Also, I don't even need to know who's talking. I don't even need context. All I need is a sentence of dialogue, and I will immediately know it's Iskarl Pust.
Yes.
I love it. So I agree that I don't really enjoy Calum all that much in this book. I love every single bit Iskarl Pust is in this book, though.
Yeah, I enjoy Iskarl. But I mean, I like those kinds of characters like Iskarl Pust and Krupp. I still think Krupp is
top tier.
But yeah, I love everything with Iskarl Pust as well. Just that playfulness. It's kind of that D&D insert into the crazy world of, like, we're just going to have this chaos demon. And it's going to be great. But yeah, Kalam as well. Like, we haven't really talked about Kalam, and Kalam is a huge character in the series. And I'm just like, I don't really care in this book. And I don't know why.
Yeah,
I wish I did.
Yeah.
I think a lot of us are there with you because, like, I love Calum in Dead House Gates. I love that whole arc. It was awesome.
Yeah.
Well, inevitably, there's a ton of stuff that we have not covered and will not be able to cover tonight. But is there anything that I skipped that any one of you three want to discuss before we call it a night? Because there's a ton of stuff just going through the chat that I completely forgot about happening, and I'm sure there's a lot more.
Well, I'm excited for you guys to get to Midnight Tides because I think it's probably the tightest book. It's also, in my opinion, his most tragic because it's got a tighter cast of characters and there's less hopping around and big stuff. It's kind of more, by Malazan standards, it's a bit of a bottle episode.
Well, I will enjoy that because, again, I think that's my big critique of this book is, like, I felt like it lacked focus. And I think that's something I struggle with in general with the series is there's so many characters, there's so many perspectives. That if because like I'm kind of like I'm not on and off reading it, but it takes me a while to get through it, and doing it that way, I forget who characters are halfway through the book.
Yeah.
So I will enjoy a tighter, more focused story.
This felt important.
Oh, yeah.
I don't remember exactly what happened, but this was when
This
Crocus
has to
and
do with
Absalom were there, right?
Crocus
Yeah,
and
Crocus,
Absalom, yeah.
They meet Anomander Rake's brother. I thought all of that was really cool. I just don't really know what the point was in having Crocus and Absalom really be there.
Yeah. And I didn't like his like evolution in the cutter. I thought that was bizarre because I didn't see the change from Deadhouse Gates to this. He just kind of was that way at the start of the book.
I feel like he's just like a confused young dude that's in love with Absalom.
Yeah, 100%.
Like,
yeah, he's just doing random shit.
Like I feel like he's just trying to be like a badass and like what Absalom wants.
Absalom's cool and edgy. I'm gonna be cool and edgy.
Yeah,
I think Colin kind of nailed it there. Like he just is trying to be what he think Absalom wants, or he's trying to copy Absalom because she, with the whole, I guess, metaphor of the book of everybody being in chains, she was bound before, and now she's forging her own path, and she, honestly, I think she could kind of take him or leave him, to be honest. And he is just trying to copy that or mimic that without knowing who he actually is.
Mm-hmm. And Cthulhu even calls him on that, I think, at one point in the book. He's like, you're trying to fall in love with the person you met and not who Absalom is.
Yes.
Which I understand, and like to me, like I didn't love their like I can understand where he's coming from because, I mean, his life has been completely uprooted from his time when we first met him to now. Like he's on this journey, like out in the world, and like just trying to figure out what the heck, like, he's like denying offers from like Cotillion or Dancer or whatever, or Shadow Throne. They're like, he's like trying to make a deal with them, and Absalom's like, nah. Like, I don't know if that's such a good idea, man. Like, this dude's pretty powerful. This was a good scene that Surov brought up at the end when Onrak learns of his wife's death. Troll starts crying and explains that he is crying because his friend can't. Yeah, Erickson, there's one thing, and Erickson does talk about this in interviews. If you guys, I'm sure, have looked up interviews with Erickson at this point. One of the things I really appreciate about Erickson is that he understands the people that are reading his books are dedicating a massive time investment. And he takes it very personally that the payoff is there. Yeah. And I think he does deliver on that. Like, I really think he tries to make it a point to not leave too many like obvious cliffhangers, but still leave enough there for interest in the next book. But like, there's closure and there's payoff, and like this long series compared to other series that I've read, there's a very distinct feeling of every book. I hardly ever get events of these 4 books that I've read so far confused because they all feel very unique and different, and I appreciate that.
100%.
Like there's some things that happen in Realm of the Elderlings. I can't remember exactly which book it happened in, but that's not the case with at least so far with Malazan for me.
Yeah, it might change in the second half of the series because obviously the kind of main thread or plot or kind of grander narrative is starting to weave its way through all the books, and you start to get more of an idea of it. And even halfway through it, with all of the constant sort of recontextualizing you get in the series, you see more of that. But I was just saying this the other day, like I think to Jimmy that each book feels kind of like a standalone in a way. Oh shit, we lost Colin.
There he is.
Oh, there he is.
I don't know what happened.
You back?
I think I'm back.
Cool.
Can you hear me?
Yep. I don't know what I was saying. Doesn't matter.
But I
yeah.
like. I think I think the point you're going to make was like at a certain point the storylines might start to blur a little bit as we get from like the front half into the back half of the series, and I'm assuming like a lot of these arcs that are very distinct and separate now are going to converge more and more and more.
Yeah. And it's
until
happening more and more within the books as you go.
Until we're whittled down to a core cast in the Crippled God, I'm assuming.
I would hope.
He could keep introducing characters in book 10, probably will.
Probably.
Well, before we call it quits, I think it would be fun for each of us to maybe go around and do a ranking of the first 4 books. I know this may be difficult for you, Carlos, because it's impossible to withhold the information that you have of Midnight Tides. But if you want to include it in your ranking, you can do that and then not tell us why.
All right.
So
Usman,
what's your ranking so far? If you're ready, if you're not ready, I'll go to somebody else.
It's so tough. Like they're so close together. Even my ratings for them have been so close together. But I'll go with a bit of recency bias. I'll say House of Chains is, yeah, I guess my favorite so far. Then Memories of Ice. Then I think I like Gardens of the Moon a little more than Deadhouse Gates. That's just
so do I.
Yeah, that's just off the top of my head, recency bias. I'm not gonna, I'd have to think like super in depth and do like a hardcore analysis if I'm gonna be like that. But this is what I'm feeling right now.
All right, Caleb.
Legitimate. I'm gonna have not quite the exact opposite of Usman, but in the context that like all of these books are probably like 4.5 stars at least. I think House of Chains is my least favorite, even though I think qualitatively it's probably one of the stronger ones. I did not enjoy this nearly as much as I enjoyed. I'm gonna call Deadhouse Gate. No. I'm gonna call Memories of Ice my third favorite. Gardens of the Moon my second favorite, because that might almost be nostalgia goggles at this point, because I just I think back on things that happened in Gardens of the Moon. I'm like, that was so fucking cool. And certain events just haven't topped that, but I think Deadhouse Gates is my favorite so far, almost exclusively because of Coltane and the Chain of Dogs.
Nice.
Okay.
Carlos?
I think if House of Chains were Karsa's perspective and through line for the entire book, it could arguably be number 1. But because it's not, it might be number 4, but I'm going to do the first 5. I actually think Deadhouse Gates is my number 5. Or is it? No, House of Chains I think is my number 5, just because I think there's more fat on it. Then Deadhouse Gates. Then Gardens of the Moon. And I honestly can't really pick between Memories of Ice and Midnight Tides. I think probably Midnight Tides, if you want me to be objective, is possibly the better book. But let's put Midnight Tides number 2, Memories of Ice number 1, because Animander Rake is so fucking cool and Moonspawn is mind-blowing.
And the siege battles were just incredible.
Unbelievable. Yeah.
It's tough. I think important context for my list is House of Change is distinctly number 4, and everything else is basically tied for number 1.
Yeah.
That's fair.
Yeah, they're so close together. It's hard.
Because there were so many. Carlos, you weren't around for this, but I struggled with Memories of Ice. I thought I hated it until the last 200 pages.
Really?
And then I was like, this book changed my life. So yeah, because like, shockingly, I didn't like Itkovian. This is Memories of Ice chat now. I didn't like Itkovian at all until the last like 2 chapters.
Right. Well, I mean, yeah, because it makes sense, because his story comes together and you kind of see, oh, it's compassion Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah.
I think for me,
is an S tier character. So
yeah,
it became an S tier character. I think for me, I'm gonna have to go House of Chains. Taking the bottom spot, and I still enjoyed it a lot. But for similar reasons to you guys, it meandered a lot, and my level of investment in almost all the other storylines, except for a couple, is the reason that it's down there. Third place for me is going to be Gardens of the Moon, and this is where it's tough. I'm going to have to go, I think, Memories of Ice second and Dead House Gates first, because the level of investment in Itcovian, which it did hit, it took all the way till the end. And for Dead House Gates, I personally was very, very invested in the Chain of Dogs and Coltan.
The whole way through.
The legend of Coltan, like the living legend of Coltan. So yeah, I think like for me, it hit so hard, the ending of that book. They all have, but I'm gonna go House of Chains, Gardens, Memories, Dead House first.
Nice.
Of the 4 so far, only Dead House Gates has like made me think I'm gonna get a tattoo. I'm gonna get a Malazan tattoo, and it's gonna be the Chain of Dogs. And then I think it was Dom actually told me I should wait till I read the Bone Hunters before I make a decision like that. So
Yeah, because there's a new crew, right? The Bone Hunters is the new crew, from what I gather.
It's weird ranking the books in this series. Like so far, it's all just been amazing, and only 4 books in out of 10. I can already say this is maybe, if I think about it a little more, it'll probably be one of my top 10 series of all time or something like that. Like only 4 books in, it's really impactful.
I can certainly see it. Oh, sorry, I cut you off. This one.
No, it's okay.
I can certainly see it hitting like my top 10, maybe. I think it's one of those series where I'm like, yeah, I really liked it. It's really not all that great, though. It's not what everyone makes it out to be. And then I'll reread it and be like, oh, just kidding. This is the greatest series ever written. I can already feel that that's exactly what I'm going to do.
I think it's probably already my favorite fantasy series. And I love Lord of the Rings. I do love A Song of Ice and Fire. I love Broken Empire. But I don't know. This just has so much meat, and it kind of works for me that each book feels like one contained experience that I get a satisfaction in the final page. So it's kind of, yeah. And all of it's just fucking bananas as well. Like it's crazy. It's absolutely batshit crazy. And I like it. And I think the level of magic really works for me. And it's mysterious and it keeps me turning the page and I want to learn more and I want to dig deep. And yeah, probably A Song of Ice and Fire is the only other series where I dig deeper into that kind of stuff, because usually I'm not like, I don't retain a huge amount of things about plot and about whatever, but I do enjoy lore and that kind of stuff. So, oh, cool, Jared.
Read all 16 books.
Book twice.
I'm telling you, I know for a fact I'm gonna be like, yeah, it's good, and then absolutely praise it the second time I read it. But even then, even though I know that I'm probably not gonna have like the absolute highest opinion of it at the end, it's still already souring other reading experiences for me. Like I go to read other series, I'm like, I like Malazan better.
I think the sheer magnitude of the undertaking matched with the execution on Erickson's part just makes this like inherently, for me right now, it's going to be in my top 5. I don't know if it'll be my personal favorite, but I think in the sheer magnitude of what Erickson's doing and the execution that he does it with, I can't ignore that it is like one of already the best fantasy series I've ever read. I think that I personally like, and I haven't finished the series yet, so I can't say that, but like Realm of the Elderlings, I've never ever connected with a series or a character more than that series. So I think that will probably be like my favorite. Is Malazan like maybe technically more impressive? Yes, like without a doubt. Yeah, I think it all depends how you're like even with our book rankings, like my ranking was based on like the emotional impact on the ending.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you guys didn't base your ranking off that.
It
I
also
think,
depends on mood, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Yeah.
emotional. My Memories of Ice got me emotionally with Anamanda Rake and Whiskey Jack and his sort of gesture to the bridge burners at the end. That floored me. And that got me more than the ending to The Chain of Dogs, which is interesting because a lot of people are kind of more on the Chain of Dogs side. But yeah, it also,
hot
yeah,
take.
like what I was gonna say is like it's mood, you know, it's whatever. Like one of my favorite fantasy series is The Broken Empire, and that is such a contained, singular, insular character study with one character. And it's just, it is the character study and the vibes. And if you ask me when I'm in the mood for that, maybe that's my favorite. But like the
Yeah.
sheer scope of Malazan.
And I think that actually probably adds to why it takes me so long to read these books, is because I do want to enjoy them. I feel like I have to be in a certain mental space to like really appreciate it. So like I very much get into times where like I'll start to read a chapter and be like, I'm not ready to do this right now. So until I get to, because I do feel like I struggle in the first half of every single one of these books, and then I get into the back half and I just rip through it. Definitely 4 of the 6 months it took me to read this book were just reading the first half of the book.
So I have a fun. This is fun. This is interesting. I ripped through the first 400 pages of House of Chains in 2 days, and it took me about 4 weeks to read the rest of it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Karsa.
Yeah.
Garza did it for you.
Yeah.
Because isn't that like basically the first part? Well, it's longer than that, but
I ripped through that section the way he was ripping through those villagers, man.
things you can't say in public. Well, I don't want to keep Carlos up too late. Is there anything else you guys want to talk about before we call it quits for the night?
I'm excited to start Midnight Tides.
Oh,
I'll be
yeah.
starting in January. So
Nice.
I want to thank everybody that was in the chat because I've been on a high. I think it's been like 70 days since I posted a YouTube video. So I literally like didn't know. These guys were like, "Can you host, Colin?" And I'm like, I don't even know if people follow my channel anymore. Like I've been so busy and just lazy on posting videos. I've been reading a ton though, so I promise I'll be starting to post more videos soon. But it was so great to talk to all you guys and hang out with you guys for a couple of hours. Thank you for taking time out of your night to come on the channel, and thank you everybody in the chat that was so active and helped me remember what the heck happened in this book.
yes, thank you, chat.
Yeah, thanks, chat.
Awesome.
Yeah, no, it was awesome.
Thanks,
It was great to see you guys and talk again. So I'm hoping we'll do it soon for Midnight Tides.
Yes. Yeah,
right,
lads,
guys.
keep me posted when you finish Midnight Tides, and we can do that.
Oh, we will.
Oh, we will.
All right, have a good night, fellas.
All right, take it easy.